Hey guys, welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast. I'm your host, Jason Buff. Today is episode 50, and one of the things that I think is becoming really important for filmmakers these days is YouTube, and the importance of YouTube and what an incredible resource YouTube is for filmmakers. And I want to touch upon a couple of things that I think that, we as filmmakers can do with YouTube in order to begin our careers as filmmakers and start making, with the goal of making a feature-length film, what we can do on YouTube and Vimeo in order to start building an audience. I know a lot of people out there think about YouTube and its relationship with the indie film world, but for a lot of people, it's something that I don't think a lot of people understand. And I say that because I've seen so many people making huge mistakes when it comes to their indie films and missing out on gigantic opportunities that YouTube and Vimeo offer to people. And that is the way that people can start building their audience and, start creating content that's going to show whether there's going to be an audience for a full-length feature. What we're really talking about is creating content and creating entertainment and, putting together things that are going to appeal to our audience. Now, for me, that world is the horror sci-fi audience. So I can only speak to that audience. And so what is the fastest way to connect with that audience and to give them something that is going to make them want to come back? If you are trying to build a audience for your horror films, one of the best ways to do that is to start creating short horror content. And this is something that we touched upon when I was talking to David F. Sandberg. One of the key things that he said to me was, people make the mistake of making content that is too long. If you want to have things that are shared, and unfortunately we live in a world now of, scrolling and people that only have a couple of minutes to get into content. So you got to create stuff that very quickly pulls people in and for the horror audience, either grosses them out or scares them or affects them. The whole key to having success with horror is to make somebody feel an emotion, to really horror is all about feeling something. If you're able to create something that in a short period of time enables somebody to relieve that thing that they're feeling and feel that fear, have that overwhelming feeling of, something jumps out at you or something just like effectively gives you that same feeling that you would feel in a full-length feature film, then you're going to start building an audience. Of course, you need to put something in that short that identifies you, that makes you unique and makes it so that people remember you. A full story into a couple of minutes and have something that people will share with each other. If somebody in your audience, think about that, if somebody in your audience would share that content with somebody else in the audience and say, hey, I know you like this sort of thing, so check this out. And that's the world we live in today. That is much more powerful than any Facebook ad you could put out there. Facebook ads, let's face it, are pretty much pointless. They never really do much. So that is a great way to, for those of us who don't have any budget, is to start creating content that will appeal to our audience and that will be so easy to share that they can give it to, somebody else on their Facebook wall. And so then it's like, it kind of doubles back to what I was saying before. We really, if you're like me, you pretty much, most of the content that you watch, most of the videos you see are things that people share with you in videos. So that's the kind of world that we have to think of, and how are we going to use that to our advantage? People don't want to spend 2 hours watching a film if it's not going to work for them. Why do you go watch a film? You go because you like, if it's a Marvel movie, if it's a Star Wars movie, if it's Harry Potter, if it's whatever, any one of these big tentpole, whatever you call them, franchises, you go because you've had an experience with that in the past and you want to have that feeling again. So how does an indie filmmaker who's never connected with anybody before, who's never built up that relationship with an audience, how do you get them to watch a film? There is no more powerful tool to start connecting with an audience than building a YouTube channel. I started Indie Film Academy about 2 years ago, and I can tell you without a doubt, the biggest thing that I get in my inbox are requests from people to do them a favor. And that comes in a lot of different forms. One would be, can you do me a favor and like my Facebook page? Can you do me a favor and watch our short? Can you do me a favor and do this or do that? And it's really kind of a ineffective way of approaching somebody. It's tricky because even when you create free content, it's not always easy to get people to watch it. And I've seen brilliant short films, and they're like 6 or 7 years old. And one of the reasons why I didn't see them was because I just kind of happened upon them. And most people aren't going to go out and say, hey, I'm going to look at, I'm going to try to find a great short. You're trying to connect with just your audience. Your audience isn't necessarily a filmmaker. They're just somebody who likes the film. So those are the people that you're going to have to get to. And they will most likely, if you say, hey, go check out this or go check out that, are not going to do it. What they're going to need, first of all, is they're going to need somebody telling you, somebody that they trust, whether it's a friend or whether it's a magazine or a blog or something they trust, Bloody Disgusting or Fangoria or whatever, saying this is a really cool thing that's right in your wheelhouse of things that you would like. And then after you have that, the proof that somebody has said this is really good and you'll like it, then you'll go see it. But if a filmmaker contacts you directly, or if somebody contacts you and says, hey, could you watch my thing? Then it doesn't have the same thing. So, another big aspect of this thing is the, social proof that you need to have other people sharing. If you see a video that's been shared 1 million times, take this, Chewbacca mask woman who's gone like crazy. How did I see that for the first time? Well, my sister sent it to me and she was like, oh, well, you're going to love this thing. This is, you love Star Wars. This is hilarious. This woman doing this thing, and that again is the culture we live in. That's the way people watch things. But if you just say, please watch my short film, people are, or it's like kind of like asking somebody to read your screenplay. It's like, hey, do you mind spending 2 hours of your time to watch this thing? And you're kind of like, sure, when I get around to it, it'll happen. And I can't tell, that was like my biggest rookie move when I started writing, was to go to people and be like, hey, can you read my screenplay? And you don't realize that people that's like the last thing they want to do. And it's the same thing with sharing video content. Make sure it's something that's just kick ass that people will share and people will look at and be like, oh yeah, this guy definitely knows what he's doing. And on top of that, one of the most powerful things that you can create with your audience is the origin story. And we talked about with Pat Flynn. But how many stories of a filmmaker do you know? How they made their first film and how they were doing this and they were doing that and they were working at a video store and, then they created this video and then it became a big sensation. People love to know the story behind the film and behind the filmmaker. So that's another way to connect with people. If you, start developing that relationship, you can say, oh, I was, living out of a garage and, then my friends came together and we put together this film and it became a big internet sensation and all this. People love not only the story of your film, but they love the story of the filmmaker behind it. So don't miss out on that. It's important. They want to know who is making the film. So start building that connection. All right, let's get it going.
Welcome to the Indie Film Academy podcast, where it's all about learning how to make and market your independent film online. And now your host, Jason Buff.
If you could say, what is your origin story? Can you tell us a little bit about your background and how you started, your YouTube channel and how you got into filmmaking?
Okay. Well, if we go all the way back, then it would be when I was about 11. We did a school project that was like a, typical maker film entitled The Chase was our brief. And, just basically just had loads and loads of fun with the simple idea of take a shot and then have the characters walk past and then we stop, move the camera and we go again. And just that, literally as simple as that is, it was so much fun. So kind of from there it was okay, grab my dad's little digital camera and then just started making little silly little shorts with my friends, stuff with Nerf guns, often fairly violent but silly short films, because that,
right.
That's how else can you get 12-year-old guys to come act in your films? Well, if you tell them that they'll be action heroes, then they'll probably be up for it. So yeah, I did that for a few, maybe even a few years. And then kind of towards the end of that period, I was getting so consumed with the technology, in particular cameras and lenses and all that stuff. I just loved like researching and thinking, how can I get the best stuff for my money? But really I was a complete tech head. So I was just enjoying the whole buying stuff and saving up and planning out what I was going to get next. And I started to realize that, even though I was very, very much a beginner, I thought, well, someone is going to be in my position where they haven't done all the research about which is the best camera to buy. So I started this channel, DSLRguide, basically with the idea that I would share product reviews and here's what you should buy if you want to be a filmmaker. And it wasn't going to be nothing more than that. But then, it kind of, as I kind of, first of all, ran out of products to review, but also just kind of started to realize that actually, there's more to filmmaking than just buying the right kit. It kind of evolved into more tutorial based, and then more into like kind of trying to tackle like creative ideas it's a really fun thing to have a weekly show that you can do and try and develop it and see how far you can take it. Being completely like influenced by what have I learned this exact week, and like that's the episode. Right. Which I think is a really fun way to kind of make a, even if it was like a web series or something like that, is to have it really evolving and really growing with you as a filmmaker.
Right. Now, when you look back on those early episodes, I mean, what? Now, give me some time frame here, because you are a couple generations younger than me. How old are you right now? Just curious.
I'm 18.
Okay.
Right now.
So when you are talking about getting these cameras and playing around with them and getting your first camera, what kind of cameras are those? What kind of equipment did you kind of start with? Because I think it's really interesting. We'll get to this in a second, but the topic of being obsessed with gear and talking about gear all the time. And one of the videos that I watched recently that I just loved was you talking about not upgrading and specifically putting that money into your projects instead of just like saying, oh, I need the latest and greatest 4K camera with this lens or whatever. So what were some of the first things you started learning? Was the first camera you got the DSLR?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
I had, let's see, a JVC of some sort that could film 480p resolution. So DVD quality, standard definition. And I think it cost £70, which is like $120 maybe.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even the best camera I could buy for the money. I bought it because it had a big zoom feature, 49 times optical zoom, which I thought I'd be using. But so I used that for at least a year, maybe even 2 years, because I saved up for editing software first, and to be fair, actually, even in the beginning, I did have the camera as one of the lower priority things, because I was, first of all, a T3i was way out of my budget. I think I saved up for like a year to get Final Cut 10 and the T3i. So it was a big purchase for me, delivering newspapers as a job. I think this was like 2012 was when I got the first DSLR. But then, 2011 and before was all on this little camcorder.
Did you start your YouTube channel after you got the DSLR?
Yes, and that's a classic act of someone who's obsessed with gear. I held off on the channel and I didn't make any videos because I knew I'll start the channel when I get the DSLR, and that's just typical, gearhead actions. Is that it just puts you off projects because you say this is going to look so much better when I have that new camera.
Right.
Hang on one sec. Let me just close the door.
Okay.
Okay, we're back.
Okay. Now let's talk a little bit about the evolution of your channel. You know, a lot of people have. Was there somebody that you saw that kind of influenced you and made you say, "Oh, that's kind of something I want to do"? Did you have other people that were? Did you see other channels where people were kind of doing the same thing, and you said, "Okay, I want to connect with people"? But I mean, what was the real? Did you have like a long-term goal, or was it just kind of like, "Okay, I just want to kind of start putting together stuff"?
I think initially, yeah, it was channels like Dave Dugdale, DSLR video shooter, Caleb Pike, guys like that who were doing the product reviews and who were doing the kind of, you know, that kind of stuff was really what got me started and realized like, hey, I can do this, you know. I was also watching Film Riot, but they were kind of on a bit of a different level that I probably, you know, I didn't feel like I was ready to kind of tackle their kind of topics, right, or even interested, to be honest. Because the thing I was most excited about was the tech. But yeah, you know, like the goal was literally to kind of go through all of the equipment and to kind of, I suppose it did come from thinking, what have I got to offer people? And at that point, that was really the best knowledge I had about filmmaking was, you know, okay, with this new technology, you know, should you buy a lens or should you buy a, you know, editing software? What's the best way to spend your money? Which is pretty boring if you think about it, but I was so into it that I couldn't help but talk about it to people who really weren't listening. So I then started making YouTube videos thinking that, you know, it was a vent really, because I would tell my family about this stuff and they didn't care. So it was very much a vent. Thinking that, did
you have other friends that were into it, or was it kind of you just sit in a room saying, "Okay, I'm just going to speak out into the abyss of the world and see if anybody is interested"?
I mean, that's pretty much exactly it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even now, I don't have many friends who are kind of in the business. Typically, you know, people my age they either don't know what they're going to do or they're, you know, going off to university and stuff.
Right.
So, yeah.
But certainly they're aware of your channel. I mean, is it strange to be known all around for having a YouTube channel and yet you're still kind of in a town where probably, I mean, are people aware of your channel there, or do people ever recognize you or know who you are?
No, people don't really recognize me, but my friends talk about it, you know, I'm definitely, you know, Simon's the guy who has a YouTube channel as one of the kind of defining features that everyone has. Right. But I think actually, you know, maybe it's just Cambridge or something, but my friends are pretty good at kind of like, you know, leveling me out a bit because they don't really care. And that's good for me sometimes. You know, you read these nice comments and you start thinking about the numbers too much, and it's nice to have people who kind of just take you down a peg sometimes, you know. It's definitely a good thing.
Yeah. I have the same thing because I'll talk to filmmakers that for me are just like, you know, I can't believe I have the opportunity just to sit there for an hour. And then, you know, I tape this out of my home office and then I walk into my room and I have a young son. So he's just like, you know, my family's not into filmmaking at all. They could care less. So I'm like, you know, I just talked to Roger Corman, and they're like, Roger, who are you talking about? You know, never mind. Just forget it. Forget it.
Not even impressed.
Yeah. They have no idea. If I can relate it to something that they can like, you know, maybe if I can say a famous movie that they know of, then maybe it can impress them. But I think that's the way with a lot of people that do this sort of thing. You know, I think Darius is kind of the same way.
Yeah. And it's good. Like some people are very kind of, you know, they live in LA and all their friends they work with, and I think you can kind of get just like fully consumed by it. And I think it's nice. It's not just nice. It's probably important to have a kind of like roots in the real world, you know, because that's who you're making films for.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely important to kind of make a conscious effort to stay grounded, I think.
Now, was there a moment when you were making your YouTube channel where just all of a sudden a video you made just all of a sudden connected with people and your numbers started going up? And I mean, how long were you doing the YouTube channel before you started kind of seeing the reaction? Was it immediate or did it take a while?
I think it's always been a very gradual kind of snowballing effect. That's probably the best way to describe it. I think that video you mentioned earlier about why I won't upgrade my new camera, that was the first one that kind of reached a wider audience than previously. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, it was very much just, the first year, or the second year was better than the first year by quite a lot. But, mm-hmm. but that was a very slow first year, very slow second year. And but I think there was just always a kind of a gradual increase, which tends to be the way it goes on YouTube. If you're mm-hmm. posting regular content and you're kind of, working at it, then, there's a fairly good chance that things will start to snowball, and it's just whether you've got the patience to wait long enough for it to kind of get to a significant level. Because I think I remember that at least the first year, the ad revenue was absolutely nothing, Mm-hmm. When you're not earning money, you're not getting big numbers, but that's kind of the YouTube game, or at least it is for a lot of people.
Yeah, I've never really heard that. I mean, except for these people that just have millions and millions of views, I haven't heard that that's a real, functioning system. It may be for a little bit of additional income or something, but it just seems like it's so minuscule what those advertisers pay, Yeah. I don't know what your experience is with that sort of thing.
I mean, my living costs are low, so for me it's fairly significant. my standards are low, but yeah, you need to be getting a lot of views, a lot of views if you want to be kind of anywhere close to full time from ad revenue alone. But of course, when people start watching, then many different ways to make money start showing up. So it's it's not so much of an issue. If you get to those kind of territory anyway, then there'll be other ways you can make money. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's one of the big ideas that, if you have a lot of eyes on you, suddenly, I mean, did you start getting contacted by people after your numbers started going up?
You mean as far as sponsorships and stuff?
Yeah, stuff I know you do the film grading software.
Right. Yeah.
Through your site and stuff. Did people like that start contacting you after you started getting more?
For me, it was probably around 50,000 subscribers, I think, mm-hmm. when I started getting those kind of emails, and the vast majority of them you just completely ignore because they have no idea. They're trying to get you to advertise, some just completely unrelated, strange product from Asia or something, mm-hmm. or they want to just take over your channel completely, and and all this kind of, but we'll give you some free products, and so it's but yeah, around 50,000 I'd say is where, for me at least, where started to get these kind of opportunities.
Right. And do you look at YouTube? I mean, now that you're making a transition from teaching filmmaking to actually making your own short films, are you leveraging that? Are you using that as okay, now I kind of have my own built-in audience. I can start creating stuff and having possibly doing crowdfunding and stuff like that. Have you started doing that sort of thing? Yeah,
it's certainly a big, if there's two sides of filmmaking, the business and the creative, then yeah, in terms of the business side, then absolutely, it's certainly an asset. It sounds awful to say it that way, but it's crowdfunding is an option, but generally kind of, it's kind of becoming a day job for me, the YouTube videos, mm-hmm. which I'll then hopefully be able to, do bigger projects, bigger short film stuff that I could either just fund myself, which is, that's the independent dream, really, to have some kind of projects you can do that are making you money, and then other projects you can do that are exactly what you want to make. And then if the ones that you actually want to make can start, paying for themselves, then that's even better. But even if not, to have a kind of, there are loads of people doing it. People do these online courses they sell. People have Patreon pages where even though they've got a relatively small audience, people are willing to support them, and then they can kind of do their thing. So yeah, there are definitely tons of different ways to kind of handle that business side, so that you can then spend as much of your time as possible, making films, which I think is for most people kind of what they want to do.
Well, what's your long-term goal? Are you planning on, do you have any thoughts on making a feature?
Long term. That's tough. Because as the internet, you can never be sure about anything that's long term. So, 2 years from now, I might be, working a full-time job completely outside of filmmaking because for whatever reason, things just dried up. So, but in terms of aspirations, I think a feature is a fairly far down the road, but I'm definitely going to be doing more shorts.
But why is a feature far down the road? Just share your mental process for that.
Okay. Well, the main thing is I feel like as far as learning goes, you don't get the full experience of learning unless you start and finish a project, so that you can kind of address the differences between what you hoped it would be, and then you can watch it and see what it turned out to be. Because first of all, you get to see the things, oh, well, I was trying to do that and that didn't work at all. But then you also get to see the other one, which is probably more interesting, which is that turned out exactly how I hoped it would, but it's not as good as I thought it would. Or, that was successful in every way I hoped it would be, but actually there's a better way of doing it. And that is just like, all that stuff is just like, really valuable stuff you get from just making a project and from just general experience. And for me to slow that down to a feature project where you are spending, I don't know, a year, 6 months, absolutely minimum, on a project, it's usually more than a year. That just seems kind of crazy to put so much time and so much money into something when you could do 6 or 8 little shorts in kind of the same time period, and then you get that constant refreshing of experience and seeing the whole process.
Right.
So I think that's maybe the thought behind it. As far as in the short term at least.
Do you find that a lot of people, I don't know how much interaction you have with your audience and the people that follow you, but do you find that there are more people who are interested in making shorts like that instead of thinking about, oh, well, my goal, for example, my generation, it's like movies and making something that would come out in a theater was kind of everybody's ultimate goal, and I came out around the time that Quentin Tarantino was putting out stuff and Kevin Smith, back in the 90s. And I think there's been a shift, and correct me if you see it another way, but people now are focused on YouTube, Vimeo, things like that, and creating a presence there where they can have that artistic expression, and they're not thinking in terms of making something that's 2 hours. And exactly what you just said, that it's like, okay, well, I'll probably get more hits on something. I'll probably get more of an audience if I do something that's, 15 minutes.
Yeah. Or less. Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe the kind of number of people who want to make features is shrinking, or maybe it's just that the number of people who want to make motion picture content is growing, or it's just been opened up to a lot of new people. Mm-hmm. It definitely seems like with people who watch my videos, I would say, as much as I can kind of gauge this, because I don't really know, but it's certainly not the case that everyone wants to make narrative things, even just narrative, Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot of people who maybe are interested in documentary, and again on YouTube, or just, you know, being a traditional YouTuber or a vlogger. And then, I don't know, I mean, is the other category, I suppose, is like kind of commercial filmmaking. A lot of people are drawn to that and kind of doing promos and stuff. That's how they get themselves established. Mm-hmm. But yeah, I think maybe there is less and less number of people who seem to be in the indie side, at least, who are kind of making features. It certainly seems to me like having a kind of established YouTube channel is a more accessible and more kind of financially viable option. Mm-hmm. You know, if I was to make a feature next year, then I think I would basically be, you know, chucking a whole bunch of money at it without much expectation of getting anything back.
Right.
And maybe that's just the way it's kind of going these days. Not to say that there aren't people who are doing it that way, but in my kind of small circles, it seems to be that the kind of goal is to make things that don't cost much money, so that you can keep making them even if you're not pulling in, you know, loads of sales, basically. So you can put it online for free, and then, you know, the majority of people see it. That right. Seems to be the kind of maybe the way things are going, or maybe just the way things are in this very small kind of section of filmmaking. Mm-hmm.
Have you thought about doing any sort of episodic sort of thing, you know? Maybe not even, you know, kind of what, who is it, Rocket Jump, those guys do?
Right. You mean like VGHS?
Yeah, stuff like that. Have you ever thought about that kind of thing?
To be honest, no.
Okay.
I really haven't, yeah. I was thinking the other day, you know, it might be cool to try a really, really low budget kind of ongoing series of like little shorts that kind of take place in one room, and they're very short, but they're kind of little dramas or something. Because I haven't seen that really on YouTube. Particularly, well, there's hardly any narrative content anyway these days, which is interesting.
Yeah.
But as far as an ongoing web series, I haven't watched many, so I think people tend to kind of get drawn into the kind of stuff they watch. So maybe that's why.
Well, okay, so I mean, the thing that's interesting for me is like I watch my son, and he's 8 now, and he doesn't even care about TV anymore. You know, he doesn't care about movies, he doesn't care about TV, but what he's really obsessed with is YouTube. And if I take away, like, the iPad is pretty much kind of all he needs now. So he watches all these videos about like Minecraft and video games, and he'll go in and watch documentaries about, you know, lizards and stuff. But, you know, it just shows you the shift in the mentality, you know, from where mine was, okay, let's go see a movie, and then, you know, a couple of months later it's going to come out on VHS, and we have that in our head ingrained as that's the way entertainment works. It's like with each generation, the way they perceive entertainment and the way they kind of put content together is different, you know. So it's fascinating for me to hear kind of the way you and your you know, not that you speak for your whole generation, but it's like, it's a completely different way of looking at things, you know, and I'm trying to not be antiquated, you know, and be kind of an old timer and talking about things that don't exist anymore. One of the things that we try to do is try to, you know, talk about new ways of distribution and all the way things are changing, but it's changing so fast, you know, it's ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And that's definitely seems to be this new kind of business form that a lot of people seem to be using, which is the, like, you have your free stuff online, and then you have the membership version, which has got the deluxe package where people pay for stuff, and they have the 1% who are willing to pay, which then funds the rest of the stuff. And that's a completely new idea, really, as far as doing it all online. But yeah, maybe the main difference is that things are just being, you know, widened. So you can have, like, on YouTube, there's so much stuff that I'm just completely unaware of. Channels that have huge audiences, but I've never seen a single one of their videos. And there are, you know, entire like communities, but they're kind of in their little pocket. So in many ways, that's great because you can have, it's not just the main blockbuster that's being played that everyone's seen and that's all you can see. You get these just, you know, crazily obscure little pockets of different content. And that's really cool because it means, you know, it opens it up for creators because creators can make the stuff that they'd want to watch and they can actually find their little audience, you know, even if it is pretty obscure things that wouldn't appeal to the mainstream at all.
Yeah.
So to me that's the main difference. Or those would be the two things, is that one, you can find your little audience, you know, no matter what it is pretty much. But then the second thing is that you've got no money to spend on it at all. And that's kind of an interesting little, like, the kind of content that tends to generate is quite interesting.
Yeah. I'm always amazed at these channels my son's watching where, you know, just, he's got one where, I mean, other people probably know what this is, but it's like this guy walks around with puppets and does voices and stuff. And
okay.
I was like, oh, that's cute, you know, whatever. And I looked down and it's got like 3 million views or something. Yeah. I mean, it's insane. So I'm like, what? I'm in the wrong business here. I mean, I should be, you know, doing silly voices and walking around my house.
It's true. The kids market is insane on YouTube. Yeah. And of course the advertisers, they love it. So, you know, they get these big ad money as well, which is pretty dodgy, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what the generations, you know, that's what people are growing up on. So it's definitely a big shift as far as filmmakers go.
So when you talk about going into the future, I mean, are you, I assume are you still in school? Are you studying? Are you going to go and study something relative to filmmaking, or is that kind of just a side thing?
I'm just finishing up with school. It's kind of, in England we do like it's kind of like the equivalent of the first year of college in America, but then it's not. It's kind of like a halfway. So I'm not going to college or university. Okay. I'm going to stop at 18 and then just kind of do my own thing. That's the plan, really. So I've just got a few little exams to finish up, and then I'll be free and have a lot more time on my hands.
But are you going to keep growing DSLRguide and making? I mean, is that going to kind of become is that something you're going to hope to grow and go into the future with and making content and that? Or is there some other avenue you're going to go into? Yeah, no, I think I will absolutely pursue, you know, carrying on creating stuff for DSLRguide. You know, it's when you do find, you know, a bit of success in something, it's hard. You start thinking, you know, am I pursuing this just because of success and money, or am I pursuing this because I actually, you know, think this is important, think this is worthwhile? Mm-hmm. But I think with DSLRguide, it's a nice kind of, it's a good midpoint because, you know, I do find myself learning stuff while making the episodes, and it's obviously very much related to what I want to be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, it can essentially allow me to not have to go out and, you know, get a job coding and spend all my time doing that. So I can, you know, spend more time thinking creatively, working on projects, and you know, plenty of big ideas for kind of expanding things and trying to do more creative lessons, trying to have get actors involved and get other people involved, and so it's going to be a fun summer for sure. Yeah, forget school, man. I went to college and it's a waste. Listen to me, kids.
Did you find that you made good connections?
But when I went to school, I actually wasn't studying filmmaking. I only studied filmmaking the second half that I was there, and when I got back into, I actually studied history and philosophy and religion and a bunch of. I mean, I didn't grow up around a lot of other creative people, so I didn't realize that was even an option, you know. And a lot of people that I know now went off to like Full Sail in Orlando, or they went to USC, they went to, filmmaking schools. And I think the main thing they got from that was just meeting a lot of people, and becoming friends with other people that worked. So when they wanted to make a film, they could just say, oh, well, you want to be a cinematographer, you want to be a, sound mixer, you want to do this or that, so they kind of they've already probably worked on some projects in school, so they have their team.
Yeah.
But in terms of really needing to spend all that money to go to film school, I don't think that, you can learn almost anything you want online now. Things have completely changed. So if I went back in time and I was like looking at college again, I'd be like, well, let's just cut to the chase. I know what I'm good at. I know what I want to learn. And if I want to, if there's anything else, I don't need to go and take a class on, mathematics or whatever, all these other things are going to make me learn. If I want to learn that, I can go out and learn that on my own. I can take a class on YouTube or Udemy or something like that.
Yeah.
But that wasn't an option when I was younger.
Yeah. That's certainly what I've been telling myself, as kind of justifying this all when everyone I know is going off to university,
So it's kind of a big thing for you to be saying.
Yeah. It seems like a bit of a risk, we have to fill out these forms at school saying, what are you going to do next year? And there isn't an option for doing your own thing, running your own business. That's just they don't have that as an option. So yeah. It definitely does seem a bit crazy to be doing this stuff. But so you said that, that you anything you could learn, you can learn online, which I think you're probably right about that. Do you think there was anything from college that you learned and you're glad you learned it, but you wouldn't have bothered to kind of go there outside of college?
Well, the only thing that, I went to a school that I went to UNC Chapel Hill. Okay. And I transferred there, and that probably doesn't mean anything, to you, but in the US it's a fairly decent school.
Right.
Okay. And it's where Michael Jordan went. That's usually all anybody knows. But that in itself gave me some confidence, just the fact that I said I can graduate from that school, that I'm smart enough to have a history degree from that school. You know what I mean? But it didn't really, I think you're ahead of the game so much already. You're making shorts, you're getting out there, you're completing stuff. That is a big part of, school, which is overcoming obstacles, going through something and saying, okay, even though it's really difficult, you take classes that you a lot of times have no interest in. I took, a geology class that I could not have cared less about. And there was no reason for it. And to this day, I still have no idea why I had to take that class. And there's all kinds of rationale that it's like, oh, well, you got to be you want to know all kinds of different things. So, but I think the college system is just kind of become antiquated. In a lot of ways, it's just a business, especially here in the US. It's big money. And so I think you'd be a lot better off, doing what you did. You went on a shoot, you worked with people. If you want to work in the film industry, if you want to do something specific, just go get an internship somewhere, work for free, meet people that are doing what you want to do. And while your other friends are kind of, they might not know what they want to do, or they might want to do something that's not in an industry like filmmaking, Sure. The thing that I always recommend is I've been, in terms of just making money, in terms of making a living, I've been a graphic designer for 20 years. And so it's like, okay, I've got that. And you have to find something that you can support yourself with. But you're already so far ahead of where I was. When I was 18, I was totally lost, didn't have any direction, and I did, to a certain extent, I did what everybody told me I was supposed to do, which was go to school, Yeah. And there weren't these options. I tried to start making films back in my 20s, but you would have to shoot on Super 16 millimeter. I saw a lot of my friends go out and make films, that were terrible. There was none of this like, oh, let's go out on the weekend and just shoot something for fun and then we'll edit it together and whatever. I mean, it's like you would shoot something and then you'd wait a month before you even got your film back, you know, and you could shoot it on video, but it looked, I mean, this is before digital, you know, this is even before, you know, a high 8, you know, I mean, we're talking like VHS cassette. I even had a camera that you would have to wear a backpack and walk around with the backpack and shoot stuff. So, I mean, that's like, I think like 84, I got my first camera and I was, you know, like I probably had a very similar experience to you, only that the technology was completely different, you know? And I mean, I would edit from one VHS cassette to the other, but the quality, you could never dream of making an actual feature or even a short. You know, and I would just make stuff on a VHS tape and show it to friends, but there was never like YouTube and all of this access to the world, you know? So anyway, sorry, that's enough about my history. We're here to talk about you. But, no, I think you're definitely way beyond, you know, the rest of the people when, you know, and there's a lot of people. I mean, look at me, for example, you're 18. I'm 42. I just turned 42 yesterday, you know? So I'm still kind of chasing this thing as well. I got out of filmmaking for a long time and I'm just getting back into it now, you know? So there is no great mystery out there. I think if you just follow what you want to do and you're ahead of the game. So I wouldn't worry about it too much.
But you see, you know, my brother is at college now and for him, it's like pretty much a social experience, you know?
Oh yeah.
Like
yeah.
That's the main reason he's there. And that is something that is very valuable to a filmmaker, you know? So like, as far as, you know, thinking, oh, well, hang on, you know, what am I missing out on here? Just that whole experience of, you know, living with people who you don't really know that well and then getting to know them and, you know, having fights and, you know, being around people who you don't like that kind of stuff, even the negative stuff, is just, you know, that's just life. And that's big stuff that could definitely feed into films and definitely, you know, if you're trying to represent the world essentially through your films, then that's one of the things that makes me think, hang on, you know, college could actually be useful for that.
Right.
In comparison to the classic YouTuber thing, which is to kind of spend all your time largely by yourself, you know, cranking out YouTube videos. So, so I think there's a little bit more to it than to just say that, you know, well, you can learn anything anywhere. So don't bother with college. Or at least more to consider if you're not taking that route.
Yeah.
You know,
well, there is a social side. I totally agree with that. You know, I moved around to a bunch of different, you know, I started in one school and went to another one. And then I went to school in, Finland. And so during those times I had, you know, groups of friends, but when my final 2 years of school, I was completely just like studying all the time, you know, so I didn't have as much of that. But yeah, you're right. There is definitely a social aspect of it that, you know, and I've still got a lot of those friends from those days. So I never really thought about that. That's a good point. Yeah, go to college. I changed my mind. Go to college.
Yeah. And maybe,
no, but in terms of just learning, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh yeah. As far as the knowledge itself, it certainly seems like you can get your experience, you know, outside of college, and you can pick up your, you know, how to use a light outside of college too. So yeah, maybe go to a cheap college if that exists in
the schools.
America.
I don't even know. Or do you have to? Is it government sponsored college there? Do you have to pay, or is it like government run?
Until very recently, it was free. Or but government paid, but now people do, and yeah, so they end up with it's I think it's maybe half as much as a typical American college.
Yeah.
But people ending up with, you know, a hefty debt by the end of it. That's for sure. So of course that's another reason, you know, of course, why to kind of go your own way.
Yeah, I've talked to a couple of people who went to different film schools like AFI, and they loved it. But I mean, those are specific schools for filmmaking. So if you want to go into filmmaking, I would suggest going to something like that. That's just like everybody there is into film, and I don't know what kind of, if that exists over there. Just something that's specifically for what you want to learn. But you can also have that experience, and I think it would be a lot more beneficial to meet all those different people. But it just depends. Yeah, like you said, if there's like a whole lot of debt that's attached to it, I don't really think it's necessarily worth all the debt, And I think there's other ways to have experiences, whether it's traveling around the world and shooting a documentary like that or whatever,
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, take the fee per semester or per year and translate that into, plane tickets and, production budgets, basically. You could even cut it in half and still have plenty of money to go and do all these cool projects and stuff.
Right.
So it's like, in terms of financially, you could do tons of cool stuff for a fraction of the price, and be learning, be getting experience, be, getting cultured and all this kind of stuff for sure, and, as long as you kind of complement it with, real world experiences, watching movies, thinking about movies, studying them, and, and making sure that you shoot plenty of stuff. Because that's probably another thing for people who need some motivation to have those deadlines in those projects. A lot of people find that helpful.
Yeah.
But as long as you can get yourself to keep making stuff, then in theory, or at least that's how I'm going to try and play it, is to have those kind of years as the film school years, but just, independent. So trying to make as many shorts as possible, trying to watch, classic films, trying to watch all kinds of films. And then also, investing into like real world experiences, real world relationships and stuff, because that's what the films are going to be about. So, you can't just be in the filmmaking world too heavily, or else you'll be, the only thing you can make films about is how to make films, that's definitely a dangerous point for me, for sure.
Yeah, well, your 20s is really all about kind of, things change very fast. And I was amazed at how quickly, when you're 18, life is still moving relatively slow. And there's something that happens with your brain and the way that you perceive time that as you get older, time accelerates. So the difference between being, say, 20 and 30, and the difference between 30 and 40, and especially the difference between, like your school years that you have, those go by really slow. And for me, it's like 4 or 5 years will go by here and I just don't even notice. It's ridiculous. And it keeps accelerating. So, you have to bear that in mind. And there's a lot of things that I did in my 20s that I can't do anymore. I'm married now. I have a kid. I have responsibilities. And I think it's really important to kind of do things at the right phase. So if you want to just get out there and backpack and do kind of like crazy stuff, that at some point, you're going to have more responsibility. You know what I mean? So you don't always get to just choose the things that you want to do. I mean, you can kind of travel around with your family and everything. Anyway, I don't want to get so we're kind of going off the rails here.
Nice, good. It's good.
I want to try and focus a little bit, and I want to use your knowledge for the good of my listeners, because I assume most of the people that listen to this show are at least aware of your YouTube channel. And if they aren't, they certainly will be now. So I wanted to focus on one of the things that I'm doing, and this is how I can learn from you. You talk about shooting short films, and I'm currently working on 3 or 4 different, I had a feature that I was working on for a really long time that just fell apart because it was just too big. It was like this gigantic balloon that just was, I was walking around with me for like 2 years working on the screenplay, trying to get funding, trying to get all these things together. And recently I'd never even thought about making shorts. It never even was something that was in, because I was like, what's the point of a short? It's a waste of time. You know, you can't really sell it. You can't do this. You can't do that. And, you know, I was getting into the idea of shooting a short just because it's so much, you know, easier. Not to say that it's easy, but a lot easier than shooting a feature.
Yeah.
And then my last interview was with, David S. Sandberg, and he's the guy that made, that short Lights Out, you know, where the guy, you know, the woman walks through the house, she turns off the light and sees the shadow. And now they're making that into a feature.
Oh, okay. Right.
So he was really interesting to talk about. And one of the things that we talked about was the fact that, you know, we live in a culture now where you need to make kind of bite-sized content. You need to make things that people can watch fairly quickly, and they're not going to be like, oh, okay, I'm going to have to put in 2 hours to watch this whole thing.
Sure.
You know, he's like, my stuff is like two minutes long, and he would make it shorter if he could. And now, you know, he's got a feature film deal with James Wan. His next film is Annabelle 2, you know, because, you know, Hollywood is looking at YouTube now. They're looking at Vimeo. They're trying to find, you know, the next big person, you know, so, and not even for that, you know, I mean, that's a nice dream to have, that somebody will be in LA and be like, oh, look at this short film, and hire somebody. You know, I think that's going to be the way things are kind of going into the future. So be ready.
Really? So you think they'll kind of like poach all the good filmmakers?
I mean, I think that, what do you mean? I didn't.
So you think they'll like, kind of poach them, you know, find the talented people and
Oh yeah. I think they're already doing that.
I don't know. I feel like the more likely situation is for like the industry just to kind of, in some ways, fizzle out, and they both become these, they already are, but you know, very separate things. And then the internet kind of just leaves everyone else behind, you know? And you know, because these people who've been making stuff for themselves, I can't imagine that many of them are going to, you know, sign the rights away to a studio, so a studio can make loads of profit off their work, you know. But maybe they will. It's interesting.
Well, I don't think the idea is that they would sign over anything. I think that they're looking for, and these are people, you know, there's people that are making content with no aspirations for filmmaking or anything. Yeah. You know, I mean, but there are other people, like specifically, David, who wanted to make feature films. You know, that was his whole thing. And he's from Sweden. So, you know, he tried to get government funding and everything, and it never worked out. But he had this viral sensation of a video, and all of a sudden he started getting calls from agents and managers and whatever. So that followed his natural progression that, oh, okay, I made this short, but the goal all along was to make a feature, you know?
Sure, yeah.
So anyway, what I wanted to talk to you a little bit, and just for my own education, because I learn a lot from your stuff too, is talking, you know, I wanted to focus about the process of making a short and go into detail a little bit. I don't know how your time is, because we got kind of into the talk on college and everything.
Yeah, we can keep
so
going.
just give me a, you know, let me know, you know, if you take off, just give me like a couple minutes warning. So let's start from the beginning. Okay. Let's say you are, working on a story. Do you have a process for just like generating ideas? Do you have like a notebook full of things? What is your kind of creative process?
Well, I should preface this by saying that I haven't really written that much of my own stuff, or not recently, as far as narrative stuff goes. But I do have a document on Google Drive called Film Ideas.
Okay.
And that is where I dump any little nugget of a good idea that I might have. So yeah, what's the process for that? It's usually just that classic thing of a random idea kind of arises, or you know, I had one not too long ago where I got accidentally overpaid, so this money showed up in my account and I had no idea where it'd come from. And that is like, it's been made into many films before, but that is an interesting situation because you start thinking that this money, I'm pretty sure I haven't earned it, right? But then suddenly you become quite attached to it and you start thinking, hang on, wait, if this is their fault, if it's their mistake, then maybe I can keep it. And having those real experiences and seeing how you start to think about that kind of stuff is, potential for a good film. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just how it goes, I think.
So you're just putting together a lot of little log lines, like what if this happened and what if that happened, and maybe that would be an interesting story.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or, news stories even. For me personally, I'm quite interested in at least for the moment, I'm more interested in kind of messages and morals rather than kind of like I don't personally get hugely excited about like a character, like, oh, we've got to make a film where the character has this trait, For me, I'm probably like, at least it starts with, let's make a film about, wage inequality or something about, like power over, about, people power, all kind of different like themes rather than kind of thinking about, because I used to try and just go, well, what would make a cool film? What would make an entertaining film? I think that's a really hard way to think of things. If you just say, well, an action film that would be exciting, then for me at least, I've got no ideas. But if you start looking at the world and seeing, what's wrong with the world politically or like ethically and all that kind of stuff, and then try and think of something that can either say something about that or expose a problem about the world, then suddenly, you've got some reference points to kind of start with. But again, I'm no big writer. That's just, some very kind of early stage advice. Right.
Now, when you were working on your, the short, Two Wrongs, that's what it's called, right?
Yeah.
How did you start putting that together? Can you kind of walk us through the process of how, because I thought that was really interesting. You put a lot of it on your video, but can you just kind of walk through the things that you learned, how you put that together, how you, even the little things like how you came up with a budget and started finding people for it, and just the process that you went through with that.
Okay. Well, that one, Johan sent me the script, so that was kind of the starting point, and it was kind of a case of that we could make something out of that. I like the script, and so we had some Skypes, and he kind of hadn't had anything made into a film before, so he was keen, and he actually convinced me to make it sooner because I wanted to put it off until at least a year or something. But he convinced me to kind of get on with it. So and this is where shorts and bigger narrative projects, it's all collaboration. It's all about collaboration. Because if he hadn't have sent me that script, if he'd sent it to me a few months before I met this guy who's a producer, I would have just been too overwhelmed with, all the different layers. I just would never have done it. But because I had met this guy, Carl, who's again, he's my age, very much kind of getting started, but he, is interested in producing and had produced a couple shorts before. Because I knew him, suddenly I had this kind of person who I could call to say, do you think we could make something out of this? So, we got the script, and then I got in touch with Carl and started basically saying, here's the kind of stuff we would need for this. We're looking at how many actors we need, and it gets very, very logistical. And for me, at least, I have no interest in logistics at all. So it was very nice to have someone who could handle that aspect. Although, as I was the kind of director / co-producer, I did find myself getting very much involved with it, but I didn't have to go and actually make the calls, So So essentially, I decided to fund it completely myself from, various earnings from my YouTube channel and, basically just saving up for a long time. And
can I ask you a question though?
Absolutely.
What was the budget that you worked with?
The initial budget was £4,000, which is about $6,000 or $7,000.
Okay. And there wasn't a thought of, you already had a pretty hefty YouTube following at that point, right?
It was less than 100,000, but around there.
Okay.
So
I just was curious if you ever thought about like crowdfunding.
Yeah. I don't really know why, but I, for some reason, I'm not comfortable with crowdfunding.
Okay. You still don't like it, or what?
Yeah. I guess I feel like it's charity, or I feel like, like,
okay.
Like it's, if you're going to ask people to donate to something, it should be more like, it's got to be like a charity thing, or I don't know. I don't know exactly why, but I wanted to kind of, I wanted to make a short and not have it cost anything from my audience.
Okay.
To kind of say like, yes, I could have sold it, but I think I need to kind of prove myself before I start asking for any, pay, putting it on Vimeo on demand or something. I want to, that is possibly an option in the future. But for now, I think the best thing for everyone is that it's free, so that, as many people can see it as possible. And if that means that I don't make any money back on the film, which I pretty much haven't, then that's fine. It's an investment in learning, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, it's a very short film. So as far as like the shoot, we worked out we could do a 4-day shoot, which we probably could have squished it more if we needed to. But with the different location swaps, it all gets very logistical as far as how many people do we need. We needed, suddenly you realize that food is really expensive, and suddenly you realize that travel and accommodation, as soon as you decide to pay your crew, which we pretty much did for the majority of people, things get very expensive very quickly. And that is the joys of trying to make a film where you're not just using friends and just, and everyone's working for free.
Yeah. You learn really fast, like the goodwill runs out very fast if you're not paying people.
Yeah. I mean, and it's a learning experience when you can work with professionals, to kind of see, to learn from them and to see how they do things. And also just a massive, like, the pressure comes off so much when I did these old shorts where I was the only person who was vaguely interested in filmmaking on the whole set. You're telling the sound guy how to hold the boom pole, and just trying to have all those things in your mind at the same time is definitely a big stress. But people do. Plenty of people do make films for free, and they do use fully volunteer cast and crew. But it's definitely worth doing a couple of times to pay people just to kind of get that experience, if you can. For short films, obviously if we were to take that same amount of money and scale it up to a feature, then I don't know where we'd get the money from. But yeah, so we had this kind of rough budget, and like in terms of best money spent, for me, casting director / actors is so worth spending money on. Like if you're gonna spend money on one thing, get a casting director, because they can do like 2 days work, or at least our one did 2 days work, and she would spend 1 day asking people and putting out feelers, basically getting people to come to the audition, and then the second day would be at her actually being at the audition. And she lined up plenty of, every 10 minutes we had a new person come in, and did it all for us without me needing to have any connections. We're shooting up in Manchester, so I don't know any actors anyway, really, but I certainly didn't know any up there. So it was just this like huge pressure off of trying to find actors. And yeah, so that would be probably my number one advice would be and it can literally be for the money of, a lens, a fairly decent lens, or certainly a camera upgrade, scrap that and spend, a couple hundred on hiring a casting director, and then your cast, obviously it depends on, you kind of do as much as you can based on how long the shoot is and how good you want the actors to be. Because if you have free actors, then, the people who turn up for a free audition are likely not going to be the most, the best actors. That's just, it's just the way it goes.
Yeah. We did a open call for something I was working on, and we spent 2 days with an open call, and it's just like, we might as well have just thrown those 2 days in the garbage. Because, But I think that's a really great takeaway for other filmmakers, that hiring a casting agent is absolutely, and I've talked to a couple of other, producers about that. I think that, there's actually a documentary on HBO called Casting. Really? It talks about, I can't remember her name, but she's a very famous casting director. And, forgive me for not anybody who's listening to this, but, it shows how fundamentally, just like how important she was to the history of filmmaking by bringing in like Dustin Hoffman, who was like, nobody ever knew who he was, but she was like, she brought him in for The Graduate, I think, and all this other stuff. So anyway, so when you were casting, were there any, during this whole process of pre-production, was there anything that you, that was more difficult than you thought it was going to be? And was there anything that was surprising to you in that process? That you can remember.
Well, I'd done projects before, so I had an idea of, trying to think of storyboards and trying to get those ideas together, and I had a rough idea of what we would need to make this happen. But probably the toughest thing was just realizing just how many things can go wrong. Mm-hmm. We were very fortunate to have a crazily smooth shoot, which is just pretty unheard of, really, to have so little go wrong on set. But that was totally made up for before and after the shoot, where just those I think it was the last 2 weeks of pre-production. Mm-hmm. There were just many times when I would be just kind of freaking out, and kind of just my mood was all over the place, because my mood would follow how we were doing on the film. And when we found out that, an actor suddenly has got a TV job, and now we can't, and, because of their contract, they have to prioritize TV jobs over shorts. So we had we're going to totally lose them. Mm-hmm. And then, so now we've got to go back to casting, and I'm not nearby, and they were our best actor. And then, so that's a complication you have to deal with. And then what are some other ones? The legalities of using a gun, out on the streets. Mm-hmm. And suddenly realizing that we would need to pay a police officer an obscene amount of money to basically hang around with us so that we could have this gun on set. Mm-hmm. And locations, trying to, I thought, we'll be able to find we'll be able to shoot in a little cafe or a little takeaway joint. We'll give them a tiny bit of money, come in when they're not open, and they'll be, they'll just let us use it. That'll be great. So I left it till, probably the last week. Uh-huh. And then, I've talked about this in videos before, but it basically was calling up 30 different places and getting rejected and rejected and rejected every single time, mm-hmm. and just getting closer and closer to the day. And they say, the manager's not in today, call back another day. And then, you wait, and just all these just tiny, hundreds of little things. We tried to buy a moped, a little motorbike, and then mm-hmm. the guy for some reason just completely bailed on us, and just all these different things that just all come together, and and it's all to the clock, so you
Right.
have all these things you need to do, all these things that you're waiting on something else to happen, and it's individually they're small problems, but when you've got 6 of them at the same time, it can just be super overwhelming. So I've got to be honest, it was not a fun experience at all, and
Right.
I think, like, I forget that every time I make a film pretty much, but it's not fun. Or at least the majority of it isn't fun. That
Does that also play into the one of the reasons why a feature is just so daunting? Just because if this is what you're dealing with a short, then it's going to be a million times more
yeah.
with the feature.
Yeah. To try and organize a 6-week shoot, a 3-week shoot, that would be pretty crazy. Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so to do shorts, so you have a better idea of, who you're working with, and to have some contacts and to have some people who can help you. Absolutely. That in theory would smooth the whole process quite a lot.
So what is the majority? Is the majority of the budget just to pay for people, like their fees, or is there
Absolutely.
something else? Okay.
For us, I decided I wanted to pay people, so that then became the priority. Like, we knew from the script there wasn't any sets, there weren't any really props or costumes particularly. I think we spent a bit on secondhand costumes, but it was, I think, at least 80% were either people's fees or relating to their fees. So insurance, because when you're employing people, you have to get insurance, which isn't that much, but again, another hassle. Insurance, their wages, but then also a couple of hotel rooms for people who weren't local. Big tip right there.
Wow.
Work with locals so you don't have to pay their travel accommodation costs.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, we had to pay, it was some obscene amount of money for the simplest hotel room, because we went with one of those chains where they up the price based on how many rooms are left. So, just realizing, like, okay, we really should have locked down who we were working with 3 weeks before the shoot, at least, so that we could get cheaper prices on the accommodation. And it's just things like that are just so boring and so stressful and it's all on the clock. So we paid too much for the accommodation because we did it too late. But yeah, food, accommodation, everything, all that kind of stuff that relates to having people on your set, it does stack up for sure. And yeah, that's where 80% of the money went. And it ended up being well more than 4,000. It
really?
It doubled. We went double over. So I was actually in debt by the end of it, which was nice. The classic indie filmmaker kind of route.
Yeah. Well, you have to do it. You're not a true filmmaker until you've, bled for your film.
Yeah.
Now, looking back on that part of the process, is there anything, going into another project? Is that the last short you've made, or is that, I don't know the timeline for that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm right. Yeah, because of my exams, I've kind of told myself that I'm off the hook from making shorts for a little while.
Okay. But like, looking back on that now, if, when you're going to approach your, another short, what would you have done different in that pre-production process, aside from the stuff you've already mentioned some stuff, but would you hire some additional person to deal with locations, or would you do anything different?
I think the main thing is just to tackle a simpler project. I think I'm realizing that if you want to do a short film that has 10 different scenes in 10 different locations, then fine. But is that going to be better than a film that takes place in one location? Not necessarily, So why not try and make a good film in one location with 3 actors, so that you can shoot it without having to move everyone around and, get all these different locations. So that's probably the main thing I would change. Because I think, things like hotel rooms, things like having long shoots, things like food, those are just constants that are going to be there on every film. So it's just about minimizing those. And I do think the best way to minimize those costs and costs, but also the logistical time and stress, is to just start simple, do a simple project. If you're making a no budget film, or a, almost no budget film, then why not just try and make a film that is very simple in terms of resources, and I think that's probably going to be my next approach, because
one room,
well, yeah,
one apartment. Yeah.
I say that now, but
well, I think that's good too, in terms of storytelling is, whenever I'm working on a screenplay or something, it's always kind of a cheat to say, oh, well, now I'm getting into a problem with the story. So, I'm going to have this quirky, fun character come in that is, or I'm going to have something fun happen that when you're looking at it with your producer hat on, it's like, oh yeah, but that's going to require all kinds of logistics and changing of locations and props and whatever, So it kind of, if you're writing with that producer hat on, a lot of times, you end up forcing yourself to write a better story. You know what I mean? And like really working on characters and things.
Exactly. I think that what you just said there is the key thing, because just like it's so easy, like a lot of people have said, because I've kind of established myself as someone who is not interested in upgrading my camera. A lot of people say, well, having a better camera doesn't make you a worse filmmaker. It doesn't, like, what's so bad about having an expensive camera? But it's the mindset of, if you are always researching a new camera and that's what's in your brain, then that is a distraction. And if you're making a big film and you've got all this money and you can put 1% of your budget in and that gets you an Alexa, great. And you can hire someone else to worry about all that stuff, fine. But for those of us who are on a low budget, we have limited money and we have limited just brain space. So I think what you said about being able to focus on characters, if the more logistical things that you have to think about, it just completely muddies the water as far as thinking about the kind of the heart of the film and the character of the film. If you have to spend 2 weeks trying to find a location, because you can't just have someone else deal with it, because on these low budget projects, if there's a problem, it's your problem. So I think that's another reason to go for the, single room, minimal actors kind of stripped down style, because you can get that foundation of trying to figure out what actually makes a good film, what actually makes characters that people connect with, and what actually makes a film that has heart and a film that says something, rather than just all these distractions of, anamorphic lenses, but even things that are seemingly less shallow than just lenses and tech, even the things like locations and logistics and stuff. Because for each one of those choices you make, even if they're a cinematic choice, even if they're a creative choice, about, you decide that the location is really important to the story and this and that, but that's not going to replace the kind of core of it, which is something that could happen in a single room of just the kind of the characters of the film.
Yeah.
So,
I think when I watched that short, one of the things that I had, I've seen hundreds and hundreds of different short films, and I've seen all different kinds of quality. And I think one of the most important things that really impressed me was the acting, that it was, you're watching it and you're like, okay, well, this is probably going to be, you just kind of have an idea of what level you're going to be watching. And the acting is so key,
Yeah.
What was your experience working with the actors? Did you kind of learn anything in terms of directing and kind of dealing with actors on the set?
That's a great question, actually. Because that was one of my biggest fears going into this project, was I was thinking, I've been making YouTube videos by myself for the last, 2 years. and
have to talk to somebody.
And I don't, yeah. But even, especially actors, you know, I don't know about directing actors. So I came away from the casting being just like so relieved, because I realized that these guys are very talented actors, and actually the amount of work I would have to do seemed to, you know, to my knowledge of what makes a good performance, they were kind of there already, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of goes back to the thing of, you know, save your money and get yourself some, I'm not talking like big money actors, but just spend a little bit of money on your actors, and, you know, and spend a day casting, and it's well worth it, because you can find some, you know, basically talented people. So that kind of fed into my approach on set, I think, because I was aware that I'm not a seasoned director who's worked with tons of different actors. So, essentially my approach was to, if I saw something that seemed to be out of place, or I heard this on a different podcast, actually. I think it was Ryan Booth who said that a director's job is to get everyone together, and you set everyone on their job, and they do their job, and all you're doing is course correcting. All you do is, when someone goes off from where they're supposed to go, you just course correct. And that is the absolute best advice that, for me right now at least, that's totally what I'm kind of experiencing. And I kind of accidentally realized that because I was doubting my own skill as a director. Essentially, I did have quite a hands-off approach. Mm-hmm. And now looking back, I'm realizing, and from kind of hearing more directors talk about this stuff, the director doesn't micromanage the actors, you know. In many ways, the actors, it's kind of their field. And to have someone come in and start talking about, oh, can you look down when you say that? Can you move over here when you say that? Can you do all this? And micromanaging face expressions, all that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know the terminology, but that's probably a good thing. Or it's certainly not a problem that I don't know the acting terminology, you know? Mm-hmm. It may well be helpful, but in many ways it's good for me to be distant from that. But I can do things like, you know, very simple things like saying, can we tone down the anger a bit? You know, I feel like, and the classic one is, you know, you try and talk about why the character is feeling this way. Mm-hmm. You know, is this character, why are they aggressive? And, but it can be the simplest things like, you know, that was a 10. If that was a 10, let's try bringing it down to a 4. And I don't know if actors hate that or if that's an okay way of directing, but that was kind of the approach I took, of just a very simple, and the majority of the time I would just say, yeah, you're doing great. Like, let's go for another take. That was perfect. We just need to get the coverage. Largely that was kind of my role.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's always, I've talked to a lot of directors and, you know, a lot of times when they were on, you know, some of the iconic films that they were on, you know, they were by far the least experienced person on the set, you know, and, you know, a lot of what and a lot of the film's quality just can't, you know, the director gets a lot of credit, and a lot of times it's, you know, especially when you've got somebody like an auteur like Paul Thomas Anderson or Spielberg or something like that, you can feel all the stuff that they're doing, you know, but, if you've got backup, you know, and you've got a cinematographer and great actors and a great screenplay and all this other stuff, it's like, okay, you're kind of there to ruin it. You know, the only thing that you can do is like get in the way of like screwing up stuff that's already really good, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's, it seems to me that it's more about leading and more about just having that, you know, we're all going this direction than it is telling people how to do their jobs. Like, of course, you know, so.
Well, are you sitting there? I mean, you're most likely the only one who really has the big picture in terms of, okay, I'm seeing where this camera is. I'm seeing how this is all going to edit together. Yeah. You're sitting there watching the final film.
Yes. Yeah. I didn't have really any contact with the crew or hardly the cast, before the film. And again, maybe that's not the best way of doing it, but yeah, in many ways, a professional crew, they don't care so much about the backstory and the creative decisions. It is largely quite a technical environment. It's just, what do you need? And then the director tells them what you need, and then you get it, and that's and they're very used to that, and they kind of do their job, and that's great. And it's a very efficient way of working. So the director's job, to me at least, is to just make sure that we're all going in the same direction. Or at least to course correct when we're not, because there are many times when things go in a different direction, but it's a better direction. So yeah, and yeah, the director's job is just to say when we're ready to move on, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
Did you have a DP for that, or did you DP it yourself?
We did have a DP, and that's an interesting. That's interesting. It was the first time I'd worked with a DP, and I did find it quite difficult as someone who is interested in cinematography, and I think that's quite common for directors to feel like to struggle to let go there, and so yeah, I probably did overstep my mark. While I was quite hands off with the actors, I probably took too much into the cinematography side, as far as like actually, touching the camera and actually talking about lighting far too much, which is something for me to work on. But yes, it's really good to have someone actually who is, like anything, to have a person who's dedicated to thinking about that one thing is really useful, because you're trying to think about everything, and then they say, well, hang on a minute, you're breaking the 180, which is the simplest idea, but amongst everything else, you're not even thinking about that. And then they point it out, and you're like, yeah, of course, and in that situation, we didn't want to break the 180. So thank you for pointing that out, and to have someone who's an operator, and it might sound like I'm kind of reducing the job of a DP, but in terms of for me at least, it felt like it was the simple things that were really actually beneficial, and to have someone to talk things through with, Collaboration is really good to be able to say, even just the act of telling people, of walking through the scene with the DP and saying, we have a shot here, and a shot here. First of all, you have to actually come up with that list, which if you didn't have a DP, you'd be less likely to come up with that and kind of commit to it. But also, just as you're talking through it, you start to see the flaws, and they'll have ideas, and they'll point out things, and what about this? And all that stuff is just great stuff, even when you disagree with them and you say, no, we're absolutely not doing it that way, and here's why. Because guess what? Then you're being sure about yourself, and you're kind of collecting your ideas. So yeah, I definitely recommend working with a DP. But I think it's definitely something that directors have to work on, particularly if you come from this generation where everyone's shooting their own stuff.
Right.
It's a challenge, to say the least.
Was there anything that you kind of learned, like that he was doing, that you kind of that you remember, or when you were setting up shots? My understanding, the stuff that I've done is, the day before you're looking at, okay, here are the pages of the screenplay, and what is there a specific format that you would go through in terms of, okay, here's the shots that we need for the day, and then you would put them in the right order so that he could light them in a certain way. Can you talk about that a little bit, or was there a process for that? Basically going from the screenplay, creating the shot list, and then lighting for the shot, and maybe doing the wide, and then doing the close-ups.
Yeah, I mean, that's that's the core thing, I think, is to start wide, light the wide. You know, our process was largely natural light, so we were very fortunate in that it was nice and cloudy and the sun was in the right place, basically, so we could pretty much turn up and things looked how I wanted them to look. But as far as the night scenes that we did light, we'd work out where we were going to be, because that obviously informs your lighting a lot, and where the camera's going to be and where the scene's going to take place. And then we probably spent 45 minutes, maybe an hour, lighting things for the wide. So it was, you know, making sure that there weren't any, obviously, lights in the frame, but also trying to cover this big space, which is difficult when you don't have big, powerful lights. You know, everything was battery-powered LEDs.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay. I didn't know that.
Which was very convenient, but did just mean we were limited in terms of power and kind of reach. But yeah, so it was kind of a collaborative process between me and the DP to kind of, you know, he would have the first ideas, certainly, but we were kind of, because we didn't have loads of assistants, we didn't have a grip, we didn't have any people, so we were both very hands-on. You know, one of us would be looking at the monitor and the other one would be, you know, twisting the light and saying, no, a bit more, okay, stop. And then, so you light for the wide, but then after that, pretty much just, we were good for the whole scene.
Okay.
Which is one method or one approach. You can't do it all the time. It depends how specific you want to be, but we managed to kind of stage things so that it would pretty much still work from the other side when we turned around for our reverse shots, maybe having to move one light. But yeah, you know, you do as much as you can, the wides and staying on one side. And then if you're going to switch over to the other side and you're going to change lights, you don't want to have to be switching and constantly. So you try and organize things in that way. But for us, at least, it was pretty fluid. We weren't spending, you know, hours and hours between each shot and, you know, setting up. And we weren't shooting things in a completely crazy order. We could pretty much, you know, you go through the whole scene in a wide, then you go through the whole scene in one of the close-ups, and then the other side close-up, and, you know, job done, really.
Mm-hmm. Do you ever look back on that and say, oh, maybe I could have done more of like a stylized, you know, something like a whip pan or something like that? Do you ever like look at that kind of like cool moves, like Guy Ritchie kind of stuff? I don't know.
I think there are plenty of things I look back and wish I'd done things differently, but none of them really, or hardly any of them, are in the kind of cinematography department, or at least things like movement and stuff. I definitely wish I'd got more coverage, because I kind of had the approach of, you know, we'll shoot this, or I had such a clear idea of how the edit would be that I shot it, so that was kind of the only way it could be edited, rather than getting every coverage of every angle and then would, you know, put it all together later. I kind of wanted to do like long takes and do the whole scene just in the wide and kind of stuff like that, which then in editing I started to realize, yeah, okay, I realize why there is that traditional coverage method of covering the scene from every angle kind of thing.
Right.
But you know, you get these ideas and very quickly you realize, okay, I won't do that next time. And, you know, that's how you learn, that's how you get experience. And, in my experience, people don't tend to make the same mistakes twice that often. I think it's quite easy to kind of pick up, at least once you realize the problem. I think it's somewhat easy to kind of address it. But the bigger things, obviously, like audience connecting to the characters, is something that people work on for decades.
Right. Though one of the things that I thought was really like impactful with it was the final scene. you know, where the guy gets shot, and it's shot with so much, you know, no pun intended, but it's shot with it's so quick that it doesn't give you a chance to be like, oh no, it's like before you can even like realize that the other guy has, or that the guy gets shot before you even have a second to kind of absorb it. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I
was wondering what your take on was that, or if it was intentionally fast like that so that it was more shocking.
This is where you have those, that decision of, was it intentional or was it a happy coincidence?
Or an accident.
I'm trying to remember that whole last scene was a really tough day. And in particular, that last shot, we had one of our actors wanted to leave early and they had a taxi on the way. So we were really pushed for time. And that shot took a lot of coordination to have people running and try and go for the car door and then not get the car door and then get pushed. And then the gun comes up and he has to fall from at the same time as the gun shot and do a convincing fall, even though he was on the tarmac. So like that was one of those shots that just had lots of moving parts. So the absolute truth of the matter is that it kind of just turned out how it turned out, rather than it having a huge amount of intentionality about the timings of every little thing. But yeah, you know, I wanted it to be a shock, so I suppose that was part of the decision to not have any dialogue there, for example, to not, you know, cut into close-ups and wait and, you know, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, that day was crazy.
I think most directors' instinct would be, okay, well, we have to, and if you watch a lot of these movies that I guess are more traditionally shot, they would have been like, oh, now we need to have opera, you know, like an orchestra come in and it needs to be in slow motion and we need to do a close-up of the gun being shot and all this other stuff. And it's like, no, it's just like, bam, it's over, you know? And I was just like, oh man, that was great. I mean, it was emotional, but it was like, you know, I've really become a huge fan of a still camera, you know, and I don't know if you've seen The Lobster or if you've seen any of, I can't remember the guy's name, but the films that he makes are so brilliant because the camera, and I used it in a blog post recently talking about just putting a camera on a tripod and having a scene, you know, happen without any camera movement. Yeah. And the camera, you know, people go off camera, they come back in scene, they do other stuff. And it's something that you see a little bit, but more, you know, one of the biggest mistakes I see with a lot of these indie films is they just have like a handheld camera or they have, you know,
the pointless slider shots.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. There's obviously a time and a place. But yeah, The Lobster, that is a strange film. I have to say, I couldn't really get on board with that.
Have you seen his other films like Dogtooth or what was the other?
No, I'd pretty much had enough after that one.
No, but they're bizarre, but they have a certain kind of there's something about them that, you know, I guess I probably didn't like them the first time I saw them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Once,
all right, moving on.
No. They're interesting in that they break all the rules of expectation. You know, just to just kill off a character so abruptly and with so little kind of care I don't remember exactly, but there are just so many just things that would never happen in that typical film. You know, the average film, that it's definitely interesting, definitely worth learning from.
Well, what are some of your favorite films that have come out in recent years? Are there films that have influenced you?
That's a good question. I'm a fairly big fan of Fight Club.
Okay.
As far as mostly from a kind of the ideas of anti-consumerism is something that I can really, really get behind, and just so yeah, mostly kind of thematically with the just the kind of anarchy and that whole idea of like having a fight for not because you're angry with someone, but just for the sake of having a fight, you know, so we can feel like you know there's a meaning to something when so you can actually feel some real pain, and all those kind of ideas of just like
tapping into your
off the rails is quite compelling, and not something that I've seen before particularly. And then, but then I saw, I think when I was I don't remember what years these films came out, but there was one year I think when Flight came out, about the plane that flips over, and Captain Phillips with Tom Hanks.
Right.
Which are, I don't think they're particularly like well-renowned films, but I really, really connected to both of those films. And maybe it was because of, them kind of coming at a time when I was kind of starting to get interested in film or something. But those two films, I think, are just really, really solid, kind of thrilling films that are interesting in terms of like the deeper messages in Captain Phillips about these thieves on the boat. Why are they actually there? And you do get a little glimpse into the fact that they have no option but to steal, and the whole ethical dilemma in Flight, like all these kind of big theme ideas, but then also just the standard conflict and the standard exciting, tense films. Like those are the kind of films for me that I can just really get behind. I found 2001: Space Odyssey just very difficult to watch, and just very, to be honest, I was very disappointed, and I know loads of people would completely disagree with me on that, but that's just the way it goes. Everyone has their different influences, and for some reason those two films do kind of stick out for me as like kind of forming films, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, I think the whole idea of having complex characters and complex moralities and stuff like that really, it really pulls you in, because in a certain way we identify that as being real, instead of these kind of cardboard character films or whatever. Yeah. But 2001, that's one of those. I think that's the kind of thing, because I have the same feeling about it that you probably did, which is it's really boring. It's a lot of scenes of space, but I mean, we live in a world now of CGI and visual effects and all kinds of really, I remember listening to an interview with Steven Spielberg, and he was before he was ever really a filmmaker, he was, a huge fan of Stanley Kubrick. And he said that was one of the biggest moments of his life, going to see 2001. And what I realized was back in that time, I guess I don't know when it came out, like 69. So it was before I was born. Right. And, for what it was just visually, it was so mind blowing, like all the things that were going on, that I think that just visually it was so new and so crazy that people were just like blown away by it, and I think it was 70 millimeter or whatever. But now, it's even like when I talk to somebody about like Star Wars, and when I was a kid, that was the biggest thing, was the original trilogy.
Sure.
And today, if you watch it, you most likely saw like the special edition or whatever, and you watch the effects and it's kind of like, okay, that's, most people, they don't understand that it was just like mind blowing to see all that stuff back in like 1980 or 1976 when they're, I don't remember the original. I was still too young to see the original one.
Right. Yeah.
But it was just mind blowing. So it's really hard, I think, when you're looking, especially when you're going through the history of film, to appreciate a lot of, there's some movies that still hold up and they're the same. I saw, Lawrence of Arabia. I saw that at the Cinerama Dome in Los Angeles. Okay. And it was one of the most amazing experiences. And a lot of like movies like Jaws and a lot of those, movies like that really hold up. But there's a lot of stuff that just kind of, the pace is really hard now that, things have become so quick. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it's hard to look at these films like objectively when you're sitting down to watch a Kubrick film. You feel kind of bad if you don't like it because you feel like you should like it because there's so much, critical acclaim behind it. So I think filmmakers have to work really hard to kind of separate finding out what they actually like and what they actually find inspiring and
right.
all this like nostalgia and just who knows, what caused films like 2001 to be so highly regarded. But yeah, like you say, people don't, if you didn't grow up with Star Wars, then you will never have the same kind of appreciation. And so, you've got to find your own things that are, maybe they're current, maybe they're not current, but the things that you can get that excited about, whether it's Star Wars or anything.
Yeah. Do you watch classic films? I mean, do you go back and watch movies from like the 30s and 40s and 50s at all?
Not hugely.
Yeah.
I did enjoy Double Indemnity, the classic noir, but to be honest, I just haven't seen that many. And maybe that would be worthwhile, but at the same time, I do believe that the best inspirations don't necessarily come from films, because then you can dilute or you can kind of strain the inspiration a bit less directly than if you were to reference 2001 in one of your movies. If you can try and be inspired by a song or by a book, then it tends to go through your own filters a bit and get a bit more kind of obscured than if you were to just, because it's so easy to just try and make a film like Edgar Wright, and there are so many people who, particularly on YouTube, where I've seen a film and I literally realized that the way that character is sitting and the way and the tone of voice they are using is literally identical to a film that I've seen. And and you see it recurring enough that you just can't help but see that other filmmaker just written all over it. And I'm all for, saying that nothing's original and that, and that you can't own ideas. But surely it's better when you can take enough sources of inspiration from a wide enough pool that it kind of gets diluted enough and changed into your own kind of ideas.
Yeah. Well, you see that. I mean, that's all over the place now, especially, I deal a lot with like horror movies and stuff like that. That's the kind of stuff that I write. And okay. I watch maybe the first 5 minutes at the maximum of most movies now and just I can't go any further because it's like I already know what's going to happen. I've already seen this movie before, and that's actually, one of the things that I try to tap more into is like, okay, let's get out of the world of horror filmmaking. Let's stop watching movies that are kind of in the, that are all kind of the same genre and have influences from other places. I love the fact that you put Calvin and Hobbes, as one of your influences, because I love that, Yeah. But it's like, if you're going to deal with real life and you're going to deal with real characters, it's like, yeah, there's so many places to get, ideas from. And, the key thing I think is just having a way to write it down and say, okay, well, And realizing where a lot of the writers that I talk to talk about the creative antenna, and not really knowing when, they know certain things that will make them have ideas. Some of them watch I watch old movies a lot just because I like, it's the tradition of storytelling, so the story, we did a podcast on this a couple of weeks ago, that the stories that we're telling are still the same stories that we've been telling for, thousands of years,
Sure.
The stories of betrayal, stories of, forbidden love, all these themes are carried out throughout, have been going back to the Greeks and back to, before that. And I think one of the interesting things you can get from older movies is you take away a lot of the, you go to a simpler form of that story, And so, especially like in the classics, and you can see like, like the Maltese Falcon or the African Queen, some of those old films, you can see the core of what makes that story work without all the stuff that they put in it now and all the quick edits. And anyway,
yeah.
But I lost my point. Let me see. I had a couple of more things I wanted to talk about and then wrap it up because I appreciate your time. Can you talk just a second about the, after you've got all your files, we didn't finish up the short story, the short film part. You got all your files. I assume you do a couple of backups.
One backup.
What's the file situation? What are the absolutely essential things that you have to have, when you're in pre-production and whatever, thinking about, post-production, this is what we need to make sure we're getting on set, audio files, video files, etc.
It's pretty simple. Everyone, you get your audio files from whoever's doing audio. You get your video cards from camera, and then you, as soon as possible, get them to a safe place, and then copy them across again as soon as possible. For us, it was just back to my laptop when after the shoot, but a lot of people do it on set. And then I just put it on one hard drive and then mirrored that hard drive onto another one, copied everything that, to both of them. So we had 2 copies. Simple as that. And then a similar thing, in post-production, just always make sure you got more than one copy. And, I think that's as much as I've got to say on it, really.
Okay. When you shot that video where you were working as a PA on a larger set and they were slating and everything, what were the key differences between what they were doing at that level and what you guys were doing? I mean, what were the things that you kind of picked up from that?
It was actually, I'm trying to think, that was actually it's pretty similar actually, because it was the same producer. That's where I met this producer guy.
Oh, okay. Because it didn't seem like a huge. I mean, it was larger, but it wasn't much larger from what I saw.
I don't know if I think it was the same number of people in the crew. It might.
Okay.
Maybe.
So
I guess
the problem that I have, I guess you hadn't shot your short. That's the problem with YouTube sometimes is the timeline.
Right.
Because when you were shooting that and when you put the video up, that was a bigger shoot to you. But I guess when you shot your short, yours was kind of modeled after that in some way, the way that was shot?
Yeah. I mean, they were both of those projects were kind of in a similar kind of budget range and and they were both for YouTube. So that was, largely that was how I realized, this can be done. You watch the behind the scenes of Hollywood movies, and you see what they're doing, you go, okay, well, I don't have access to any of that stuff. And then you do your own little things of, just like Friends. And then that was a nice reference point for me to see, okay, having a first AD is really valuable on set. Mm. And, so that was very much where I kind of took reference from. I'm trying to think.
So you had a first AD on your shoot?
Yes. And he was great to have someone who was kind of like, in many ways, like my voice, because I tend to just be thinking quite a lot. And then but he would be saying, come on everyone, we got to move over here, or can you guys get out of the way? Or, here's what we're going to do. And I could very much not have to be, I could kind of be in my own little world when I needed to be. And he could be the one who's dealing with people, basically, which is another thing, So that was very nice to have him as someone who could kind of deal with just kind of people managing almost when you've got a number of people on set. But there weren't a huge number of differences actually, because we did kind of take inspiration from that other shoot. I haven't done much stuff on big sets at all, really.
Mm-hmm. Have you ever tried to get on one of the sets that are, in London or in Manchester? I don't know if anybody shoots much I honestly don't know much about England as a country.
I'm sure it happens. But I've just not got involved. I might be.
You should reach out, man. You've got, right now you've got, you wouldn't believe how much of a platform it can be, just see what people are shooting and say, hey, can I come in and, put people on your show,
I mean, I've got one potential for that at the moment. A possible, Luxembourg film, which could be quite fun.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I definitely.
But I think honestly, man, I think producers would be like, especially mid-level, not low budget indies, but like, maybe in the $5 million range indies would be like, hey man, let's do an interview for
marketing purposes.
But that's the thing, a lot of people talk to me just because they're trying to get the word out about stuff, they probably think I've got more reach than I do, but, I hate to say, but no, it's very powerful. And a lot of people, a lot of directors and people that you would want to talk to and get in the same room with, I can guarantee you if you just write them on Twitter or something, they'd be like, oh, who's this? Oh, wow, he's got a popular YouTube channel. Maybe we could have him on set one day and hang out. I think it could take you a lot further than you realize.
Yeah.
Because I just reach out to people, and sometimes I'm blown away by the people that accept. Right. Sometimes.
Yeah. Sure.
And I'm just like on Twitter, I'm like, hey, you want to do an interview? They're like, yeah, sure. Well, just give me a call.
Yeah.
So
absolutely. Definitely. It's different. Some people are really good at networking and that kind of stuff. They find that it comes to them naturally. Whereas I'm probably more on the scale of, I have to work hard if I want to force myself to kind of do networking and get in touch with people and meet new people. But
it's all online.
You're absolutely right that it's probably not that difficult to do, and a little bit of work goes a long way, I reckon.
Yeah. Oh, it's nice. I'm a total introvert, so don't think, me having a podcast, if anybody that's my friend, I don't think anybody even knows that I have a podcast, really? Even though, well, I'm in the filmmaking world. Yeah. And I've got my filmmaking friends, but my wife's family and people that don't, I post stuff on, Twitter and Facebook and stuff. And it's like, hey, look at this big guy I talked to. And they're like, yeah, okay, that's great. Whatever. But, you can, if you just get on Twitter and just start, seeing what productions are nearby and just say, hey, can I, drop by the set sometime? Can I do an interview for the thing or whatever? And it's a great way to just kind of network with people, and all of a sudden they might be like, hey, you want to direct a movie? Maybe not.
Oh yeah, I'm sure that's exactly how it goes. It
happens all the time, They're like, hey, my arm is kind of hurt, so could you come in and direct the rest of this, film for me?
It does happen.
Well, I highly recommend listening to the one that I just did with David Sandberg, because it is amazing. He talks about, he had only made shorts with his wife in their apartment in Sweden. And within a year, he was in Los Angeles shooting a feature film with James Wan and directing Maria Bello, and it was insane. And he's just as down to earth and as nice and just amazing, in terms of how just completely open to talking about the whole process and the depression that he went through while he was shooting and thinking he was making a terrible movie and, looking at the first edit and everything. And it's a great episode to see kind of that change, from being like, kind of we are where we can shoot everything ourselves. We know how to light everything and do everything, to all of a sudden having, the grip truck and the DP and everything. Anyway.
Yeah.
Listen to it.
Okay. That does sound interesting, particularly about thinking your film is no good. Because I think that is a very more and more common, the more people I talk to and stuff, I'm starting to realize that everyone kind of deals with that, which is nice. That it's not just me.
Yeah. So do you go through moments of just like, you're not feeling it and it's just, this is terrible while you're going through the process?
I would say it's not moments of feeling it's terrible. It's moments of feeling like it might actually be all right. And then the rest of the time is all just, oh no, this is going to be a disaster. Why am I making films? Et cetera, which I think, I think that's fairly common in all creative aspects, I think, is kind of hating your own work, which, is a weird, mental approach. And a weird way to end a podcast as well. but I think it's normal, I think.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's important for people to realize that, everybody goes through that. And, even the best films, I remember listening to a thing about how distraught Quentin Tarantino was when he made Pulp Fiction, that he would just he was just like, this is the worst movie ever made.
Exactly.
So one last thing, are there any resources that you like online that you use for filmmaking that you can, that you regularly tune into that you think other people might like?
Probably the best one I could recommend is, as I talked about on my channel the other day, Good, the podcast.
Yeah, I never heard of that. I'm going to check it out.
Oh, you totally should. It's, just some really nice, down-to-earth conversations with professionals of all kinds in the filmmaking circles. And, they're not just talking about gear. Well, they never talk about gear. They are just talking about, the creative stuff, and then also just being honest about how, some of the struggles and some of the kind of the stuff that most people don't usually talk about, but it's just really encouraging stuff to hear, I think. So I totally recommend that one.
Okay, I'll check it out.
Yeah.
Do you listen to podcasts a lot?
Not usually. I mean, that's pretty much that's the main one I listen to.
Right.
I'm not a big podcast kind of guy, but that one I can definitely recommend.
Okay. And do you want to tell people how they can find you online and what maybe your Twitter handle and stuff like that, just so they can follow you?
Sure. So I make YouTube videos at youtube.com/DSLRguide. I take photos, Instagram at Cade Visuals, CAD Visuals. Have a lot of fun on Instagram. And then Twitter is at DSLR Guidance, because I couldn't get DSLR Guide. So there you go.
Damn it. Oh, well. All right, man. Well, I really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to all the videos you come up with in the future.
Yeah, great. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show.
All right, that's going to do it for today's episode. I want to thank my guest, Simon Cade, for coming on. Don't forget, if you want to get 2 free audiobooks about filmmaking, go to ifafreebooks.com, and that goes directly to Robert McKee's story. And also, if you want to learn to sell your film and learn all